Hey everyone, welcome back to Dan's Chess Lounge. So we have finally arrived to the last round of the 2018 Candidates Tournament. So Fabiano Caruana has cleared first place going into it, but there's many chasers that can catch him. So in today's round, he was playing against Alexander Grischuk. Let's go ahead, see what happened in the game. Grischuk was white, started out e4, e5, knight f3, knight f6. Now, you guys know by now that Fabiano has been playing the Petrov defense in this tournament against the King's Pawn opening. That seems to be the opening that he has prepared against 1e4. You have d4 here. This is not the normal main line move for the Petrov. Usually it's knight takes e5, but this is still playable. In the database, this said that this was the number 2 most popular move. So then you have knight takes e, and then d takes e, so both players grab the pawns on the e file. d5 reinforces the knight there on e4. Knight b d2, because you can't just have this beautiful knight right here sitting on the in the middle of the board here. So you have knight takes d2, bishop takes, and here I just wanted to say that white has this pawn that's a little bit overextended. Not totally. It's not technically an isolated pawn because it still belongs to this island over here. But right now, it's kind of by itself. It's not attached to that island right now. So white is going to have to keep an eye on that pawn there because it's starting to get close to black's camp, black's territory. So, but right now, white has defenses that can protect it, such as the knight here, and if the bishop swings there, things like that. So, just in the future, white will have to keep an eye on that pawn there. You have bishop e7, developing move. Bishop d3, developing move. c5, a nice central strike. And it's also threatening to take away squares from the bishop there, putting the bishop on a less active diagonal if it has to retreat back here to e2. So therefore you have c3, which gives the bishop a flight square. Knight c6. Hits this pawn there. Castles, bishop g4, threatening to remove the defender of this pawn here on e5. So rook e1 reinforces the pawn. Queen d7. h3 puts the question to the bishop. The bishop drops back to h5. Bishop f4, reinforcing that pawn there that's kind of all by itself. It's a lonely pawn. I won't call it an isolated pawn. I'll call it a lonely pawn. Queen e6, a3 with the idea of expanding on the queen side here with b4, castles, b4, h6, bishop g3, b6, and now you have this incredible move by Grischuk, knight d4. It's a crazy looking move here, but really it's to exchange the queens, get the queens off of the board. And it's a clever way to go into an endgame. And these are the kind of moves here that I try in my own personal tournament games. And then it just results in a blunder or a lost piece or a lost game. It never seems to quite work out when I try these type of moves. So you have bishop takes queen on d1. Knight takes queen on e6, pawn takes, and now with f takes e, you see the reason why Grischuk moved his bishop from f4 to g3, because if the bishop was still on f4, it would be a discovered attack here. The rook would be hitting the bishop. So after the rook captures this bishop here, then black would be able to capture the bishop on f4, and black would be up a piece. So that was a great deep calculation by Grischuk to move the bishop back to g3. Okay, let's continue with the game. Rook a takes the bishop, And if you stop and evaluate the position right here, it's relatively a closed game. The only file that's open right now is, there's no files that's open, but you have semi-open files. You have this semi-open F file and this semi-open D file. So it's still a relatively closed game. White does have the bishop pair though, which is always a dynamic duo. But the thing is, in a closed position, you would rather have the knight. You would rather have the knight here in a closed position. So it's a good game. It's a dynamic game. C4. This is the most logical move by Fabi to keep the game relatively closed, since again he has the knight, and knights are better in closed positions than bishops. So bishops are great in open games where they can have a lot of scope and play along the diagonals, but in the closed position, knights are better. Bishop c2, b5, a4, and a6. And then let's just stop right here again. I want to just note that Fabi has all of his, not all of his pawns, but he has most of his pawns on light squares, and that's also a good in-game fundamental to think about and to recognize and to try to employ in your own games, to put your pawns on the opposite color of your bishop, because then your bishop has free range to roam all throughout the board, and it's not going to get blocked in by its own pawns. So that was just another thing that I noted when I was analyzing this position. F3, and right here there's an interesting continuation that Fabi could have went for. I don't know if he saw it or not. If anyone has seen the press conference, let me know in the comments if he went over this variation. But he didn't play this in the game, but how it goes is he could have played knight takes b4 here, sacking the knight, and after the bishop captures, attacks the rook moves to e2. Now you have bishop c5 check, bishop blocks, and now you have b4. And what it is, he sacked his bishop. He sacked his knight, for the pawns to be able to be passed and they can roll. So you have these three passers here that's very, very dangerous, very, very close to promoting as well. And after black sticks his rooks on the C and the B file, it's going to be very hard to stop at least one of these pawns from promoting. So white is probably going to have to give up his bishop or some type of material to stop that. So this would have been a very promising line for Fabi to take, but for whatever reason he didn't play this line here, and instead he went a little safer route. He played bishop g5. Now you have bishop f2. The bishop would like to get to the c5 square there. That would be infiltrating black's position. Bishop f4, a double attack on the e pawn. Bishop c5 hits the rook, so the rook moves out the way. Now you have bishop d6, which protects the pawn on e5, and it also takes away that square on f8, which is black's only semi-open file. That's ideally where the rooks would like to be. They would like to be on that semi-open file. And another thing is the bishop there on d6 blocks this push here. So it looks like Fabi would have liked to push this pawn, and that's one of the reasons why he had moved his rook to d8 as well, so he can push this pawn that's supported by the knight. It would have been supported by the rook. So this bishop d6 is like a thorn in Fabi's side right now. Bishop g3 hits the rook. Rook goes to e2. And white always has to be on the lookout for the sack here in case black does sack this rook for the bishop and the pawn. The bishop will capture the pawn. And then that will give black a massive pawn cluster. black would have all of these pawns here marching forward. So that would be tough to deal with. White, again, would have to probably sack one of his pieces, his bishop or his rook, at some point when the pawns start rolling and getting closer to the promoting square. So now you have g5, king f1, king f7. Both players are getting their kings more active. It's another good in-game fundamental is to get your king as active as possible. Don't play passively with your king in the end games. Bishop c7 hits the rook. Rook goes to e8. Bishop goes back to d6. I think Grischuk would have been happy here to repeat the position, get a draw, and call it a day. But Fabi is going for a win because he's trying to win the tournament. And he just doesn't want to take a chance on a draw. Depending on what the other players do in their games, a draw might not be good enough for him to win. Rook a, c8. Now you have rook a1. White wants to swing both rooks to the a file. So when he plays a takes b and then a takes b, the file will open up and he'll have total control of the a file. Rook e d8. This stops the bishop from the bishop can no longer go to c7 and try to harass the knight on d8. Because again, Fabi is setting up a plan to push this pawn here on b4 to try to break open the position. Or else it will be a draw if they just shuffle their pieces back and forth without any more pawn breaks. Bishop b1, it clears the way for the rook to swing over to a2. Rook d7, rook a3, and now you have d4. Fabi is taking things in his own hands. He's going ahead and playing d4 to try to break the position open. Charge! A takes b, a takes b, c takes d, and now you have knight takes d, which hits the rook. And the rook swings over to a2. Now Grischuk has complete control over that a file. Knight c6. Here the knight is serving multiple roles. It's attacking the pawn on e5, right, along with the bishop, but it's also serving as a defender, keeping the rooks off of this a7 square. Let me draw it with a red line. It keeps the rooks off of this a7 square. So Grischuk right here, he's still playing sort of active, but he's okay with the draw though. You can tell from his play that he's okay with the draw. Caruana is definitely playing for a win. That whole push, the d4 push, opening up the position, says that he's playing for a win. Bishop e4 hits the knight. Now you have bishop captures the pawn on e5. And if the bishop captures back, if the white bishop captures back here, then he just loses a pawn for no reason. See, like if bishop takes the bishop, knight takes bishop, and he just lost the pawn for no reason. So he can't capture back. Instead, bishop takes knight, and now the rook captures the bishop. So, and then the bishop captures the pawn on b5. So now material has been restored. Material-wise, the position is equal. But positionally, black is definitely in the driver's seat because this pawn right here is only 3 squares away from promoting, and there's nothing in front of it right now. Whereas the white pawn is blocked by the bishop, and it's got further to go to promote. So black is kind of in the driver's seat right here. Black is playing for a win. White is just trying to hold on. Rook d1, check. King e2. And now the rook is behind the king. So white is in a little bit of a pickle. It's a very awkward game for a white to play at this point. king e3. That allows the rook to defend the pawn. Rook b1. Fabi hits the pawn on b4. He's playing some very inspiring chess right now. He's definitely playing for a win. He took a close position that was relatively even and made something happen. He made it become more active. He took matters in his own hands. So, good play by Fabi. Rook a7 check. King f6. Bishop d7. It hits the rook on c8, but it also threatens this pawn here on e6. Once the rook, one of the rooks, go to a6, that pawn there could fall. Bishop f4 check. King e2. And now rook d8. So at this point right here, I want to ask you guys a question. How does white defend this b pawn right here? If he plays the rook to a4, then that's not a good move, because now you have rook b2 check, king f1. The king has to go to f1 to defend the pawn on g2, but then you have rook d2, which is a double attack on the bishop on d7. Once the bishop moves out of the way, the bishop would go to c6, not c8. But once the bishop goes to c6, not c8, then you would have rook d1 check, king e2, and then you would have rook 8 d2 check, mate. So there's no good way to defend the b pawn over here. So in the game, Grischuk played rook c2, counterattacking the c pawn here for black, but that allows Fabi to just pick off that pawn on b4. So with that practically secures Fabi's draw. He's definitely not going to lose this game unless he like completely falls asleep at the wheel and loses on time. So he's pretty much secured as a draw at this point. But we don't know if a draw is good enough to win the tournament at this point. So he plays on. So now the question becomes, how does Fabi promote his runaway pawn here? How does he get it to the promotion square? That's what the rest of the game is going to be about. First he plays c3. Rook d7. Grischuk is going for a trade, because a trade would help him out because his king is in a much better position to get to the pawn. Black's king is kind of out of it right now. Rook c8 hits the bishop. Bishop retreats to bishop e4. Now you have h5. So here, Fabi is showing more principled chess fundamentals by playing on both sides of the board. He understands the power of having two weaknesses. So now he's pushing his pawns on the king side over here, trying to create some weaknesses over here. That way it's going to be too hard for a white to defend, stop the pawn from promoting, and defend his king side over here. King d3, rook b2. So should Grischuk capture the rook? What would happen if he captured the rook now? Rook takes, pawn takes, and then that just pushes the pawn one square closer to promoting. So that is not what Grischuk wants to do there. Instead, he plays king e2, h4. Now the pawns is fixed over there. So if white ever plays g4 or g3, then you can have either en passant or the bishop will capture. So now the pawns are fixed over there. King e5, rook a1, rook d8, rook d1, going for the rook trade, rook db8, rook a1, bishop d2. At this point right here now, Fabi has locked down his pawn and secured it with the bishop. And it's interesting to note that there is no piece of white that can take this pawn without it being a rook sack. So that is definitely not what Grischuk wants to happen. He definitely does not want to sack one of his rooks for the pawn or for the bishop. So that is very solid. This structure here is very solid for Fabi. And now also allows the king here to walk on up on over here and try to get closer to this g-pawn. And once the g-pawn falls, the rest of the pawns are going to fall. Rook a6, rook d8. And this is a little side note right here. I wanted to mention that at this point right here in the tournament, the rest of the games had been decided. They all ended in a draw. So all Fabi needed was a draw himself to actually clinch the tournament and win the candidates tournament. And he probably knew that. I don't know if he knew that for sure. If you guys know, if y'all saw the press conference, let me know in the comments if he talked about knowing ahead of time, if he knew a draw would do it for him. But I was just putting the question out there. Do you guys feel like it was disrespectful for Fabi to try to play for a win, knowing that the game could be drawn and he would still win? Is this just torturing Grischuk for no reason? Is he trying to send a message to Carlsen that, you know, he doesn't back down from anyone, regardless of the circumstances? Maybe he didn't even know. Maybe he was so into his game that he didn't even realize the position of the other games. So, guys, let me know what you think in the comment section. Rook c6, rook b1, threatening to capture this pawn on g2. King f2 protects it. Rook a1, rook c4. This is an attempt to keep the king from going to f4, because if the king goes to f4, then you can have like a discovered check once the bishop moves away. So rook d4 blocks that potential discovery. Rook moves out the way, and now you have rook b4. Now if you get both rooks on the back rank there, that's really going to be lights out for white. King e2. Now the king can march his way over here. King f4. It's becoming a very tough position for Grischuk to defend. King goes back to f2 to keep the black king off of this square here, because if he can get to this square here, then this pawn will fall. Now you have rook b1, rook f8 check, king e5, bishop d3, rook b2, king moves over to e2, check, and now you have rook c1. This is an incredible looking position. Look how you have this like diagonal here. You have all of black's pieces surrounding white's pieces. This is an amazing looking position right here. It's like black is literally smothering white's pieces. So you have rook takes, and now the pawn is only one square away from promoting. Rook b8, bishop c3 protects the pawn, bishop e4, bishop d4 check, and this is a very critical moment here because this check here keeps the king off of this diagonal, keeps it off of this square here on f2. Now the black king can march on in and pick off this pawn. King e2, king f4, rook b4 threatening to capture the bishop. e5 reinforces the bishop. Now you have king g3. And that is going to do it for Grischuk. He resigned here because there's no way to stop black from picking off the g-pawn. And once the g-pawn falls, the rest of the pawns are going to fall as well. And then it's going to be too much because he still has to watch over this pond here that's only 1 square away from promoting. So Fabiano Caruana wins not only just this game, but he wins the 2018 Candidates Tournament. And that's kudos to him. Bravo to Fabi. And I just want to say he was my pre-tournament pick. I picked him out. You guys remember in the preview videos that I did, I picked Fabiano Caruana because I feel like Caruana is going to give Magnus Carlsen the toughest games. I feel like there's not an intimidation factor with Caruana and Carlsen. Like some of the games that I've already seen where they played against each other, Fabiano plays Carlsen very, very tough. So it's going to be a great battle. And I don't know who I'm picking yet. You know, it's going to be a great battle. It's in November, and it's going to be in London, the World Championship. So I'm kind of interested to see who Fabi is going to pick to be his second and to help him prepare. I'm real interested in knowing that. So, okay, guys, I hope you enjoyed the whole entire series from the preview, the player spotlights, on through to the actual tournament. So, give me a like if you did. Don't forget to comment, subscribe if you haven't subscribed already, and stay tuned for the next one.